In my years of observing human nature, from the royal court to the scholar's study, from the merchant's house to the prisoner's cell, I have witnessed a most troubling phenomenon, the multiplication of learned fools. We live in an age that celebrates knowledge as the supreme good, yet we produce graduates who can dissect arguments but cannot discern right from wrong, who master techniques but lack wisdom, who accumulate information but remain ignorant of their own souls. This is not education, it is the manufacture of sophisticated barbarians. The most dangerous person in any society is not the ignorant savage but the educated villain who can use his learning to justify evil, his rhetoric to seduce the innocent, his credentials to gain trust while spreading corruption. Today, I invite you to examine why education divorced from virtue does not elevate humanity but creates a more dangerous kind of ignorance, one that wears the mask of enlightenment while serving the darkest impulses of fallen nature. For when we sharpen the mind without purifying the heart, we merely give more powerful weapons to our weaknesses, creating monsters who destroy with precision and corrupt with eloquence. Chapter 1: The Learned Fool, When Intelligence Serves Vice. When I penned Utopia, I observed that the utopians considered it better to have a virtuous fool than a learned scoundrel governing their affairs. This was not anti-intellectualism but profound wisdom about human nature. Intelligence without virtue becomes cunning, knowledge without character becomes manipulation, eloquence without truth becomes propaganda. The educated monster is far more dangerous than the simple sinner because his evil is amplified by his abilities and legitimized by his credentials. In my time as Lord Chancellor, I encountered many brilliant men who used their education to rationalize injustice, to construct elaborate justifications for their greed, to weaponize their rhetoric against the innocent. They could quote Aristotle while acting like beasts, cite scripture while serving Satan, debate philosophy while practicing tyranny. Their education had not made them better humans, it had made them more dangerous predators who could devour their prey with sophisticated reasoning and scholarly citations. Consider the heretics I prosecuted. Many were learned men who had twisted their considerable intellectual gifts to serve error. Their education gave them the tools to spread falsehood more effectively, to seduce the simple with sophisticated arguments, to dress lies in the garments of scholarship. Men like William Tyndall possessed genuine linguistic abilities and theological knowledge, yet they used these gifts to undermine the faith of countless souls. Their learning became a curse, not just to themselves but to all who fell under their influence, proving that knowledge without virtue is like a sharp sword in the hands of a madman. This is why the ancient Greeks spoke of sophistry, the art of making the worse appear the better cause through clever argumentation. When education focuses solely on technique without grounding in moral truth, it produces sophists, not philosophers, manipulators, not teachers, destroyers, not builders. The tragedy is that such people often do immense harm while maintaining the appearance of respectability, wearing their academic robes like wolves in sheep's clothing. A man educated in facts but ignorant of virtue will use his knowledge to serve his passions rather than truth. He becomes a monster precisely because his monstrosity is masked by credentials and refined by technique. He can destroy more systematically, deceive more subtly, corrupt more thoroughly than the simple sinner ever could. The uneducated tyrant rules through brute force. The educated tyrant rules through sophisticated manipulation that his victims often mistake for wisdom. In our modern world, we see this same pattern repeated endlessly. Brilliant economists who design systems that enrich the few while impoverishing the many. Clever politicians who use their rhetorical skills to manipulate rather than serve. Educated professionals who exploit their expertise for personal gain while claiming to serve the public good. Their learning has made them more effective in their evil, not more virtuous in their character. Chapter 2: The Corruption of Purpose, When Learning Becomes Self-Serving. True education begins with the recognition that knowledge exists not for its own sake, nor merely for personal advancement, but for the service of truth and the common good. When this purpose is corrupted, Learning becomes a tool of pride rather than humility, dominance rather than service, self-aggrandizement rather than self-knowledge. The monster of miseducation is born when we forget that all genuine learning should make us better people, not merely more clever ones. In my correspondence with humanist scholars across Europe, Erasmus, Bede, Vives, and others, I repeatedly emphasized that our studies of classical antiquity and sacred texts should make us more virtuous, not merely more clever. The goal of reading Plato was not to win debates but to understand justice. The purpose of studying rhetoric was not to manipulate others but to communicate truth more effectively. The aim of mastering languages was not to impress but to access wisdom across cultures and centuries. Yet I witnessed, even in my own circle of humanist friends, the temptation to pursue learning for selfish ends. Some sought knowledge to advance their careers at court, studying not to serve truth but to flatter power. Others accumulated erudition to display their superiority over less educated neighbors, using their learning as a weapon of intellectual pride rather than a tool of service. Still others used their scholarship to attack opponents rather than seek truth collaboratively, turning the noble art of disputation into mere verbal warfare. When education becomes primarily about personal advantage rather than moral improvement, it produces individuals who are intellectually sophisticated but spiritually stunted. They may know much about the world but little about themselves. They can analyze external phenomena with precision while remaining blind to their own moral condition. They become what Scripture warns against, those who learn but never come to knowledge of the truth. This corruption of purpose transforms the natural human desire to know into a vice. Knowledge becomes an addiction, a way of feeding pride rather than nourishing wisdom. The scholar begins to see other people as either audiences for his display of erudition or obstacles to his intellectual advancement. He loses sight of the fundamental truth that all genuine learning should increase our love for God and neighbor, making us more humble before the mystery of existence, not more arrogant about our limited understanding. The monster created by such misdirected education is perhaps the most dangerous of all, the brilliant egotist who uses his considerable gifts entirely for selfish purposes while convincing himself and others that his pursuit of knowledge is inherently noble. He transforms the sacred duty of learning into an idol of self-worship, creating elaborate justifications for his intellectual pride while remaining blind to his spiritual poverty. In my own household, I tried to model a different approach, teaching my children and wards that learning was a privilege that brought with it greater responsibility to serve others. We studied not to become superior to our neighbors but to better understand our duties toward them. This is why I insisted that my daughters receive the same rigorous education as my sons, not because I believed learning would make them prideful, but because I knew that virtue-guided education would make them more effective servants of the common good. Chapter 3: The Fragmentation of Truth, Specialization Without Integration. One of the greatest dangers I observed in the educational methods emerging during my lifetime was the tendency to fragment knowledge into isolated compartments, creating specialists who knew much about little while understanding nothing about the whole. This fragmentation, when untempered by wisdom, produces minds that are simultaneously sharp and blind, capable of extraordinary precision in narrow domains while catastrophically ignorant about the broader implications of their work. The physician who can heal the body but knows nothing of the soul's needs, the lawyer who masters legal technique but understands nothing of justice, the merchant who calculates profit with mathematical precision but cannot comprehend the moral dimensions of commerce, the theologian who can parse complex doctrinal questions but remains cold to the love of God. These are the products of education that prizes expertise over wisdom. In Utopia, I imagined a society where learning was integrated, where those who studied medicine also studied moral philosophy, where legal scholars were required to understand theology, where craftsmen were educated in literature and history. This was not mere fancy but recognition that truth is one, and that fragmenting it into isolated specializations diminishes our humanity. The utopians understood that a person educated in only one discipline is like a musician who knows only one note, technically competent perhaps, but incapable of creating harmony. The danger becomes acute when specialists begin to believe that their narrow expertise qualifies them to pronounce on matters far beyond their competence. The natural philosopher who thinks his study of material causes makes him an authority on final causes, the political strategist who believes his tactical knowledge encompasses moral wisdom, the economist who imagines that understanding markets means understanding human nature, the technician who assumes that knowing how something works means knowing whether it should be done. These are the learned fools that miseducation produces. Such fragmented minds become monsters because they combine genuine competence in their specialization with breathtaking arrogance about everything else. They can do immense harm by applying their specialized knowledge without understanding its proper limits or moral context. They become tools of forces they do not comprehend, serving ends they have never seriously examined, like skilled craftsmen building weapons without asking who will use them or for what purpose. The integrated education I advocated sought to prevent this fragmentation by ensuring that all learning was oriented toward the ultimate questions of human existence. Who are we? Why do we exist? How should we live? What do we owe each other and God? These are not separate subjects but the integrating principles that give meaning to all other learning. Without this integration, education becomes mere training in techniques disconnected from their proper human purposes. During my legal career, I saw how this fragmentation created lawyers who knew procedure but not justice, judges who understood precedent but not equity, advocates who could argue any side of any case without regard for truth. They had mastered the technical aspects of law while losing sight of its moral foundation. This is why in Utopia, I insisted that all laws be simple enough for ordinary citizens to understand, not because complex jurisprudence is inherently evil, but because when legal knowledge becomes too specialized, it serves the lawyers rather than justice. Chapter 4: The Cultivation of Judgment, Wisdom Beyond Information. During my years in legal practice and government service, I learned to distinguish between two very different kinds of mental capacity: the ability to acquire and manipulate information, and the ability to judge wisely. Many possessed the first who utterly lacked the second. They could memorize vast quantities of data, perform complex calculations, construct intricate arguments, yet when faced with actual decisions affecting real people, they displayed appalling lack of judgment. True education must cultivate not just the capacity to process information but the wisdom to evaluate it, prioritize it, and apply it well. This requires what the ancients called prudence, the intellectual virtue that enables us to deliberate well about human affairs. Prudence cannot be acquired through mere study. It requires experience guided by moral principle, practice supervised by wise mentors, and above all, the humility to recognize the limits of our knowledge. The monster created by education without virtue lacks this prudence. He may possess enormous technical competence while being utterly incompetent at the art of living well. He can analyze complex systems while being unable to manage his own household. He can theorize about human nature while understanding nothing about his own motivations. He can discourse eloquently about abstract principles while being completely unable to apply them wisely in concrete situations. This is why in Utopia, I insisted that rulers be philosophers, not in the sense of being academic theorists, but in the classical sense of being lovers of wisdom who had integrated knowledge with virtue through long practice. The utopians understood that technical expertise without moral wisdom is dangerous, that cleverness without character is destructive, that information without judgment is useless. They would never entrust power to someone merely because he was educated. They required that education be seasoned with virtue and proven through service. Consider how many of our contemporary problems stem from this divorce between expertise and wisdom. We have economic theories that ignore human nature, treating people as mere units of production and consumption. We have political strategies that disregard moral consequences, focusing only on short-term tactical advantages. We have technologies that solve technical problems while creating spiritual disasters, connecting us digitally while isolating us personally. We have educational methods that fill minds with facts while leaving souls empty, producing graduates who know everything except how to live well. The cultivation of judgment requires what I tried to practice in my own life: the integration of study with prayer, reflection with action, theory with experience, individual development with service to community. When I studied law, I also studied theology, understanding that human law must be grounded in divine law to be truly just. When I engaged in politics, I continued my scholarly pursuits, knowing that power without wisdom leads to tyranny. When I served as a judge, I sought not merely to apply rules but to discern the justice those rules were meant to serve. This integration cannot be achieved through curriculum reform alone, though that is important. It requires a fundamental reorientation of educational purpose, from producing successful individuals to forming wise persons, from creating efficient workers to nurturing complete human beings, from training specialists to educating citizens capable of moral reasoning and virtuous action. Chapter 5: The Mockery of Virtue, When Education Breeds Cynicism. Perhaps the most pernicious effect of education divorced from virtue is its tendency to breed cynicism about virtue itself. When students are taught to analyze and critique without being taught to love and revere what is good, they develop a corrosive skepticism that mistakes destruction for sophistication, doubt for wisdom, rebellion for maturity. This cynical education produces monsters who take pride in their ability to tear down everything noble while creating nothing beautiful in its place. I witnessed this firsthand in my debates with the reformers. Many were genuinely learned men who had developed extraordinary skill at finding flaws in existing institutions, exposing the failures of their betters, deconstructing traditional beliefs. Men like Simon Fish, with his Supplication for the Beggars, could point out every abuse in the church with devastating accuracy. Yet this critical capacity, admirable in itself, had become their only intellectual tool. They could tear down but not build up, doubt but not believe, analyze but not synthesize. Such minds become monsters of negation. They take pride in their ability to deflate others' enthusiasms, to puncture others' hopes, to demonstrate the flaws in others' commitments. They mistake this destructive capacity for wisdom and wonder why their lives feel empty despite their intellectual accomplishments. They become what I called in my polemical works, destroyers of faith, not because they intend evil but because they have been educated to see criticism as the highest form of intelligence. The true scholar, educated in virtue as well as technique, learns to critique from love rather than spite, to doubt specific claims while maintaining faith in truth itself, to expose particular failures while preserving reverence for genuine excellence. He understands that criticism serves construction, that doubt serves faith, that analysis serves synthesis. His questioning springs from a desire to purify and strengthen what is good, not from a compulsion to destroy everything that claims to be noble. When education fails to cultivate this constructive spirit, it produces what I called in my correspondence, learned destroyers, minds capable of undermining anything but building nothing, criticizing everything but creating nothing, doubting everything but believing nothing. Such people spread intellectual and moral confusion wherever they go, like skilled physicians who can diagnose every disease but heal none. They become particularly dangerous when they gain positions of influence in universities, courts, or churches, for they use their learning to justify their cynicism and spread it to others. They teach the young that idealism is naive, that virtue is hypocrisy, that all high claims are mere pretensions designed to manipulate the simple. In doing so, they create generations of smaller monsters in their own image, each successive cohort more cynical than the last. The antidote is education that teaches students to love truth more than their own cleverness, to serve goodness more than their own reputations, to seek wisdom more than mere information. This requires teachers who themselves embody the integration of knowledge and virtue, who can demonstrate through their own lives that learning deepens rather than destroys our capacity for wonder, reverence, and commitment to what is genuinely excellent. In my own household, I tried to model this approach by showing my children and students that rigorous intellectual analysis could coexist with deep faith, that scholarly criticism could serve rather than undermine moral commitment, that the more we truly understand the world, the more reasons we find for gratitude, humility, and service. Chapter 6: The Technological Monster, Power Without Conscience. In my time, I could barely imagine the technological powers that future generations would wield. Yet even then, observing the effects of printing, gunpowder, and new navigational instruments, I understood the fundamental principle: any increase in human power that is not matched by an increase in human wisdom makes us more dangerous, not more excellent. Education that increases our capacity to manipulate the world without increasing our capacity to govern ourselves creates monsters of unprecedented destructive potential. The man who can split atoms but knows nothing of moral philosophy, the woman who can engineer genes but has never seriously considered what it means to be human, the technologist who can surveil entire populations but has no understanding of privacy, dignity, or the limits of legitimate authority, the economist who can manipulate global markets but understands nothing of justice or the common good, these are the monsters that purely technical education produces. Such people are not evil in the simple sense. They may be personally kind, professionally competent, socially respectable, but they have been educated to think that technical questions can be separated from moral questions, that how we can do something is more important than whether we should do it, that efficiency matters more than justice, that innovation is inherently good regardless of its human consequences. They become what I might call innocent monsters, capable of enormous harm through sheer moral blindness. In Utopia, I imagined a society where technological advancement was subordinated to human flourishing, where new inventions were evaluated not just for their practical utility but for their moral implications. The utopians understood that power without wisdom is tyranny, that capability without conscience is destruction, that innovation without integration is chaos. They would never adopt a new technology simply because it was possible. They would ask whether it served genuine human needs and whether its benefits outweighed its moral and social costs. This is why I insisted throughout my career that those who would wield power, whether political, intellectual, or technological, must first submit to the discipline of virtue. They must learn to govern themselves before they can be trusted to govern others or to reshape the world. The unvirtuous man with great power is like a child with a loaded weapon, dangerous not through malice but through the mismatch between his capabilities and his wisdom. The technological monster is particularly dangerous because his destructive power is amplified by his technical competence. He can cause more harm more efficiently than the simple sinner ever could. He can corrupt more systematically, manipulate more subtly, control more completely. And because his methods are sophisticated and his credentials impressive, he can maintain the appearance of legitimacy while doing enormous damage to the human spirit and the social fabric. Consider the modern pharmaceutical executive who develops genuinely beneficial medicines but markets them in ways that bankrupt families, or the social media engineer who creates platforms that connect people globally but designs them to be addictive and divisive, or the financial innovator who creates complex instruments that generate profits while devastating entire communities. These are not necessarily evil people, but they are educated monsters, technically competent but morally blind, professionally successful but humanly destructive. The solution is not to reject technology but to ensure that those who develop and deploy it are educated in virtue as well as technique, that they understand the full human implications of their work, that they are accountable not just to shareholders and colleagues but to the common good and to God. Chapter 7: The Path to Integrated Education, Wisdom as the Goal. Having diagnosed the disease, I must prescribe the cure. Education worthy of human beings must begin with the recognition that we are not merely rational animals but moral agents created for relationship with the divine. Our learning should make us more human, not less, more humble, not more proud, more loving, not more selfish, more integrated, not more fragmented. The goal is not to produce efficient workers or successful professionals but complete persons capable of wisdom, virtue, and service. This requires what I practiced in my own household and recommended to my fellow humanists: the integration of intellectual, moral, and spiritual formation. Students should study grammar to communicate truth more clearly, rhetoric to persuade others toward good, logic to think more precisely about moral questions, mathematics to appreciate the order of creation, natural philosophy to understand our place in the cosmos, history to learn from the wisdom and folly of our predecessors, theology to understand our relationship with the divine. But all these studies should be oriented toward the ultimate questions: how should we live? What do we owe each other? How can we create more just societies? What is our relationship to the divine? These are not separate subjects but the integrating principles that give meaning to all other learning. Without this integration, education becomes mere accumulation of information rather than formation of wisdom. Such education requires teachers who are themselves integrated human beings, scholars who are also saints, intellectuals who are also servants, experts who are also examples. Students learn virtue not primarily through lectures about ethics but through relationships with mentors who embody the integration of knowledge and character. They see in their teachers that learning can make one more rather than less human, that wisdom enhances rather than destroys one's capacity for love and service. The curriculum must be designed to prevent the fragmentation that creates learned monsters. Students studying medicine should also study moral philosophy to understand the ethical dimensions of healing. Those learning law should study theology to understand the divine source of justice. Future leaders should study literature and history to understand human nature and the patterns of rise and fall in human societies. All students should engage in some form of service to the community, applying their learning to real human needs and seeing firsthand the moral implications of their knowledge. The goal is not to produce specialists but complete human beings, not clever manipulators but wise counselors, not successful careerists but faithful servants of truth and justice. Such people may know less about certain technical subjects than their narrowly educated counterparts, but they will understand better how to use whatever knowledge they possess for genuinely human purposes. They will be less likely to become monsters because their education will have formed their character as well as their intellect. In my own life, I tried to model this integration, serving as lawyer and scholar, politician and prayer, humanist and Christian, student and teacher. The result was not perfection but a life oriented toward truth and service rather than personal advancement and intellectual pride. This integration sustained me through the trials of public service and ultimately enabled me to choose death rather than betrayal of conscience, the final test of whether education has truly formed a human being or merely created a clever animal. Conclusion. As I faced my final trial in the Tower of London, I realized that my education had prepared me not merely to argue cleverly but to choose rightly, not merely to understand the world but to serve the good, not merely to advance my career but to preserve my conscience. This is what genuine education should accomplish, the formation of human beings capable of wisdom and virtue, not merely of technical competence and professional success. The test of any educational system is not whether it produces wealthy graduates or powerful leaders, but whether it forms persons capable of choosing truth over convenience, justice over profit, virtue over success. The monsters created by education without virtue are not inevitable. They are the products of our choices, choices about what to teach, how to teach it, and why we teach it all. When we choose to orient education toward the full development of human beings in relationship to truth, beauty, goodness, and the divine, we produce not monsters but saints, not destroyers but builders, not cynics but hope-filled servants of the common good.